I'm going to show you a picture in a second here, and I'm going to ask you, what are the constraints, the structural constraints in an organization like this? Does this look like an innovative organization to you or not? Most people have sort of this visceral reaction to this kind of thing and say like, oh my God, that looks not innovative. And we sort of have a sense of that it's not innovative. And so the question is why? Why is an organization like this, that's structured in this way, not innovative? Oh, this is a university, by the way. University have a certain job around innovation. The job is not to come up with radical new ideas, though. So structure constraints. So what happens is often that there's something that happens down here, in one little small part of the organization, and how do we move that thing to a different part of the organization? So, for example, communication. Like, how do we communicate ideas across? Also, structure means that there's lots of levels of no. Like no, 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 no. So many people can say no, but in order for something to go forward, everyone has to say yes. So that's another these kind of structural constraints. So what I want to do is I want to put these structural constraints into this set of three categories. Sort of rough subcategories, let's call them. About seeking efficiency and control. A lot of what structure is around efficiency, around control, as I talked about at the beginning of this set of lectures. Organizational size, we have to have structure in order to grow, in order to have control while we have large size, and there are implications there. And then also we're going to talk about rewarding survival. In some organizations, what's rewarded is surviving and not taking experiments, not trying things or making the world a better place. It really is just say, okay, did I survive? Have I not made a mistake? So let's go into these in a little bit more detail. Certainly we need to have, if we have large organizations, we need to have some form of control, some kind of structure that helps us do efficiency, that helps us be efficient. We have a lot of people, a lot of resources that those people represent, and they're going every different direction. That's not a very good thing. So we want to have some kind of control of them. But some of the problems that we have is sometimes we'll separate initiation of a problem from the implementation of that problem. So consider in Xerox PARC, what was happening? They were generating ideas in California, and they were assessing those ideas in New York. That's problematic, right? So there's kind of the control mechanism for moving information back and forth is really difficult. Organizations are really, often large organizations especially, large organizations that have these kind of structures are really focused on efficiency. There's a lot of people, they have to maintain control, and they want to make sure that things don't get out of control. That is to say that they want to make sure that the organization remains predictable. That's what control is about predictability. And so what is innovation? It is not about being predictable, at least not in the early stages when we're trying to understand what are the different possibilities we could use to achieve this particular goal that we're shooting at. Size. We have these big structures which allow us to make organizations bigger, but the more people we have, for example, the more different ways that people think. If I have 10 people, I have 10 opinions. They have different divergent goals, different assessments of what's going on. It's really different. Also, the more people I have, the more risk to an organizational resources I have. So let me say that differently. If I'm paying each of these people and they're all going off in different directions, I need to have control so I know that I'm using that resource, namely their time, their brains, effectively. Also, I want to really reduce variance, right? So the large organization, I want to be able to have this routine outcome. And so what I really need to do is to sort of reduce the variance, and I do that through control, right? Put people into very specific places to keep that control ahead. And that again reduces variance, that reduces change, which leads us to having less innovation. Another thing that happens, communication. So think about how do we move information from one part of the organization to another. Go back to the story of Xerox PARC, the people in California saw the future. They saw something that happened. A lot of what they saw has come true. Steve Jobs, his vision was a computer on every desk. And when people heard that, they laughed in his face. They thought that was the most ludicrous thing they heard, a computer on every desk. Now look where we are now. And so the people in Xerox PARC, they saw that. But somehow they could not communicate that to the people in New York who said, we're busy trying to protect the copier business. Let's not talk about that right now. And so this communication, how do we move information around? Many large organizations actually make information thinner and thinner and thinner. Maybe you're in an organization where you get a report that's a bunch of numbers, and if you're managing on numbers, it's going to be really hard to seek innovation unless you're doing financial innovation, right? Because you don't have enough details of what's going on in the gory details of those numbers. But the numbers have to be thin, that is, they have to be easily understood, easily transported, they have to have a fixed meaning in order for us to maintain control. And so that's why we end up with these real thin, not rich, real thin communications inside of organizations, large organizations especially, that don't allow innovation to happen, that don't allow the real communication that will let innovation happen. we reward survival, right? So from a structural perspective, we have organizations, we have these things called seniority, we have loyalty, we want people to not make mistakes, and if we start to value that more and more, oh yeah, where's Joe? Well, Joe made a mistake, Joe's gone. Well, that sends a pretty strong message to people inside the organization about what's valued. What should I change? Should I try to change? What's the risk of that? Well, the last person who did that got fired. Okay, well, I'm not going to make that change. I'm going to let someone else make that change. And if you have an organization, especially a large organization of people who are all saying, I'm not going down that path, I'm not going to make that change, we have that problem. That becomes the problem of structure and of survivalism inside of an organization. You may have problems, and this goes to the communication problem, the problem of knowledge generation. If we generate knowledge and information, that is, we take data and we turn it into something we know, information, and if we separate that from the use of that information, through telephone lines, through space, through geography, and through lines of hierarchy or authority, it becomes really difficult. And so like I said earlier, separating idea generation from the concept assessment, it can be really problematic because people may be using the wrong or the inappropriate assessment tools to measure whether an idea is a good idea or not. And here's some couple things to think about. If we have, people think about generally like two kinds of, well, there are many kinds of knowledge, but let's for a moment talk about these two kinds. Tacit knowledge, these sort of things that you sort of know how to do, like if you hit a tennis ball, it's hard to tell someone, but you can sort of watch them and you get a feel for it. Things that we feel for, things that we communicate almost more informally or subconsciously or through body language. Then there's explicit things. The explicit things being things that are written down and crisp and directions and things like that. So we can talk about, in this case, showing, which is when we have some tacit knowledge and we're trying to show someone else how to do this thing, and it's like hitting a baseball, it's that kind of thing. Yeah. We then could talk about also, if we have tacit knowledge and we're trying to turn it into explicit knowledge, where we describe it. We use analogs, we use metaphors, we use different ways of saying, here's what I'm talking about, and trying to get the person to see that explicitly. We may have explicit things when we're trying to get people to understand how to do them almost naturally. So sales training, for example, or coaching, these are things that we do where we tell them explicitly, put your arms here, hold here, and then by doing it, it becomes automatic, that people understand tacitly what to do. And then we may have explicit information that we turn into explicit information. And this one, and this where I've indicated the explicit to explicit, the explaining tends to be what organizations do. And that tends to be what's good for hierarchies. That's because things that can be written down, things that can be clearly articulated are explainable, right? So I can put on a report and I can send it to you, I can put it in ones and zeros and send it through the internet in different ways, whereas these other kinds of transfers of knowledge are much more difficult in a large organization, right? Because if people are trying to show each other things, that means you have to almost be in the same space. And you can't have lots of large organization with lots of people in the same space, right? It just doesn't work in that way. And so that's one thing we want to think about these issues of structure and these issues of structural constraints. And so the kind of problems, I'm just going to just to reiterate, to repeat, structural constraints, organizations use structure to achieve efficiency and control. And by doing that, what we do is we have some unfortunate byproducts, some unfortunate consequences, some unintended consequences. We separate initiation of ideas from implementation, and so there's information that's generated in the front that doesn't make it to the back. We have top-down decision-making, so people at the top of organizations are deciding, should we do this project or that project, without the rich information of being in there. They aren't down there seeing the information. And also, the goal is to maintain control. Maintaining control means not having variable outcomes. Again, they say is to not have unpredictable outputs. So if you have an organization and the outputs are very unpredictable, that's not a good thing, generally speaking. And so people on the top will control the organization in a way to make sure that those unpredictable outputs don't come. Sometimes even at the cost of innovation. Size, it's the next one. Talk about organizational size. We said how having too many people create all these different divergent opinions about where we should go, different goals, different assessments that people have. More people want to have a say. They want to have a vote in the innovation going forward. That's a problem. We may have a larger risk to organizational resources. If my organization employs 100,000 people, there's a lot of risk to making an innovation that doesn't work. And so the size itself actually creates a more risk that makes us less willing to entertain risky ideas. And then also, with a large size, we have to reduce variance. We need people to play certain roles in the organization, so we really confine those roles so that we can actually keep predictability in the organization. And then finally, the third one I talked about was survival. how it is that we tend to reward survival, or we can reward survival in large organizations, where it's about loyalty and not necessarily about creating value. Again, when we reward people for being loyal to us, that is, for not making mistakes, for always sticking with the what we call the party line, to stick with the way that the organization wants to go, and you stay around because of that, then you are rewarding survival. And we remember from the group level constraints we talked about that this idea of cohesion, people start becoming the same, they start thinking the same, they start looking the same, they start having the same ideas. That will not lead to innovation. And again, that's tied to the idea of making mistakes. And here the problem of making mistakes may have to do with more with organizational policy than before at the group level, where we talked about mistakes being an emotional problem. Here they're a problem of organizational policy. If you make a mistake of this size, you get fired. That's an organizational policy. That's not necessarily an emotional one. Okay. So how do we overcome these organizational constraints? I mean, these structural constraints in organizations. You know, if we're going to have large organizations, we have to have structure. If we're going to have small organizations, we have to have structure. We have to know, we have to coordinate our behaviors. We have to understand how it is we're going to be together, right? Well, one thing we can do is we can use more fluid structures. Network organizations that, what I would offer is, think about project organizations. So when in Hollywood, when they film a new movie, they pull together a project team. That project team works together on that project, and after the movie's done, do they stay together forever? No. They disband, and they go work on different projects. And that kind of fluidity brings information in as it's needed. You can pull in different kinds of resources when they're needed. You can, so basically you're following a project logic. And some organizations are structured in ways that don't allow that to happen. And so if you have an innovation initiative, give the people a room, give them a space, put them there, and say, this is your job for this project. And in 6 months, this project will be done, then we'll put you on another project. And that's a way to get at innovation. And not to say, well, you are the finance person, and so you will always do finance, and I'll put you on a project, but you still need to do your day job, so you can't go work on that project all the time. And you know you have deliverables here, and you know you have things here. And so what happens is we end up not being able to go help with a project. Our loyalty is split. So using these fluid structures is a way to do that. We want to facilitate mixing. What are we learning? How are we learning it? You know, the insights that are made in one part of the organization, how do we share it with other parts of the organization? Here I'll take you back to the story of Spence Silver. Remember we talked about Spence Silver, one of the inventors of the Post-it note? Well, there in 3M, they had these weekly and monthly show and tells where people would bring out their project they had been working on. Oh, here's what I'm looking at. Look, it's this adhesive that doesn't stick to anything but itself. Isn't this interesting? That kind of sharing actually has value. It's difficult to share over large geographic distances. And again, go back to the idea I had about the knowledge types, tacit knowledge to explicit knowledge and vice versa. It also, again, makes it hard to share insights that we have. But you can do it, right? You can have weekly get-togethers and show and tells. You can tell people inside the organization what's going on. And facilitate mixing, I also mean here sharing the strategy, what's going on from a strategy perspective, so that people can understand how they need to behave in their part of the organization that is within the structure to go where they're trying to go as an organization. Now we have innovation outside of the lab. Often in organizations, so we have an R&D group, they take care of innovation. We just do finance, or we just do accounting, or we just do marketing here. Go talk to the R&D people. Well, for me, that's problematic because you want innovation throughout the organization. Innovation is such a powerful engine. Why would you not have everyone in the organization working on it? You know, every janitor, every cook, every single person in the organization should be able to, in their part of the world, make it better. And if you tell them the strategy, like we learned in the last episode, then they can do it in the right way. So don't let people off the hook. The deal is you are in this organization, you innovate. And that's what we're going to do. Some organizations, I've encouraged people to put a item on the personnel evaluation called innovation. Innovate. You know, to what extent has this person innovated this year? Even if you don't define it, people will start thinking about innovation. They'll say, if he's going to put a check mark in that box next to where it says innovation, then I better do something innovative. And that will get people to actually start thinking about innovation, even without having sort of put it out there as saying, this is what we're trying to do, we're trying to innovate in this specific way, but just get people thinking about it. Just the same way you might have a thing called efficiency, shows up on time, works hard, have something called innovates. Makes the world a better place in this organization by doing things that are different than we were doing yesterday. Next is about dissent, that cultivating dissent inside organizations may be important. There's a thing called groupthink, and you may have heard of this, but in some organizations that structurally, when a manager says no to projects, then they're dead. and there's no other way to go around. And again, I'll hark back to 3M. In 3M, Spence Silver and Art Fry had to go to the CEO. They had to sort of jump a few levels to the CEO to get permission to do another market test. And so we need some kind of mechanism for what we call a dissent channel for someone to say, this decision was made against this innovation, I'd like to have a different opinion. I'd like to appeal that decision, have someone else look at it and tell me why this is not a good idea. Sometimes ideas are not good ideas and sometimes they need to be killed. Don't get me wrong. But at least they should get a fair hearing. And so if they get a fair hearing and then you still kill them, yeah, that's good. They should be killed. But if they don't get a fair hearing, then we don't know yet whether that was that $1 million idea or not. The last thing I want to offer is getting teams aligned, getting the teams in your organization, get them aligned, get them innovation focused, get them project structured, get them pushing that way, and use process. Put muscle behind your process. If you have a process for how it is we innovate in this organization and it's communicated to everyone and people know how to do it as part of the organizational policy, you're going to have power. And by keeping those teams aligned in direction with the strategy, it will be a really powerful thing. And think about it this way, I could have mentioned this in the strategy portion of it, that if you tell people, this is our strategy and this is what we're trying to do, please go off and think of things that will help us get there. That's a much more powerful way than if people are pushing off in different directions and you have to run around saying, why are you doing that? That's not consistent with our strategy. Why are you doing that? That's not consistent with our strategy. Instead of just saying, look, this is where we're trying to go. Can you help us get there? If you're really smart and hardworking, you probably can help us get there in a new, more effective way. I want to leave you with this idea in this part we're talking about structure, about innovation at Apple. And so we know that Apple is considered a very, very innovative organization, and lots of people would attribute that to the genius of Steve Jobs at the time. And so that would be a good question of was it his ideas, so the individual level, was he able to overcome individual constraints? Well, I think a lot of what we might think about as innovation in Apple, actually the constraints that are overcome are actually organizational constraints. So imagine a story that goes something like this inside of Apple, that there's a manager, an innovator, and he says, wow, like we were trying to move this project forward and I need some help. I need some help from other managers. So I go to another manager and I say, hey, I need your help. I need about 5 of your people to use them for a short time. We're trying this thing out. We need this to work. And so in a traditional organization, most organizations, what will happen? No, I'm too busy. My people are busy. I got my own projects. Sorry, I can't help you. Maybe someone else can help you. But inside of Apple, I think what would happen was someone would say, yeah, that's all nice, but you know what? Steve wants this done, and he wants it done yesterday. And then what happens? Oh yeah, I'm available. How many people do you need? And so this kind of removing roadblocks, right? That sort of removing structural constraints that maybe what Steve Jobs was doing was that. Maybe that was the power of what he did, was helping overcome these structural constraints inside of an organization. And since Steve Jobs has died and left Apple, we can see that some of the issues that they're having inside, some of the organizational issues, some of the power problems they're having inside could be due to the fact that he's not there pushing these roadblocks out of the way. That covers organizational structure constraints, and next we're going to talk about resource constraints.